Dust Devil Gulch wasn't much to look at. A scattering of wooden buildings baking under a relentless sun, a saloon with swinging doors always threatening to fall off, and the ever-present dust that coated everything in a fine, gritty film. But dominating the town, both physically and in spirit, was the militia barracks. A large, imposing structure made of rough-hewn logs, it seemed to suck the life out of Dust Devil Gulch. The barracks wasn't just a place for soldiers to sleep. It was a symbol of Captain Bart's iron grip on the town. He and his men controlled everything, from the water supply to the local businesses. Anyone who dared to cross him faced swift and brutal consequences. The townsfolk lived in fear, their voices hushed, their gazes downcast. The once lively town square was now eerily quiet, the laughter and music replaced by the heavy tread of the militia's boots. Even the stray dogs seemed to slink away whenever they saw a soldier approaching. The air itself felt heavy, thick with dread and the unspoken knowledge of Captain Bart's cruelty. The only splash of color came from the faded sign above the general store, a reminder of a time before the militia, when Dust Devil Gulch had been a place of hope and opportunity. Now, it was just a place of survival. Even the sun seemed to avoid shining directly on the barracks, casting long, ominous shadows that stretched across the dusty streets. The wind, usually a playful companion, now seemed to whisper warnings, carrying tales of Captain Bart's terrible deeds. Dust Devil Gulch was a town held captive, waiting for a hero to break the chains. Amidst the gloom of Dust Devil Gulch lived Sarah. She wasn't born there, but fate, in its cruel way, had deposited her on its dusty doorstep. Sarah had arrived in Dust Devil Gulch with dreams as big as the prairie sky. She had hoped to open a small bakery, filling the town with the sweet smell of cinnamon rolls and apple pies. But those dreams were quickly crushed under the heel of Captain Bart's militia. Her father, a kind but stubborn man, had spoken out against the militia's unfair taxes. For that, he was imprisoned, and Sarah, to secure his release, was forced to work within the militia's barracks. Not as a soldier, but as a servant, tending to the needs of the officers, enduring their sneers and harsh words. Each day was a struggle. She cleaned, cooked, and mended clothes, all while trying to maintain a shred of her former self. She found solace in small acts of rebellion, a slightly oversalted stew, a button sewn on a little too tight. These tiny acts gave her the strength to face another day, but her spirit was slowly being eroded. The light in her eyes, once bright and full of hope, was dimming. She missed the feel of flour between her fingers, the warmth of the oven on her face. She yearned for freedom, for a life where she wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder. She dreamed of escaping Dust Devil Gulch, of finding a place where she could bake her pies and live in peace. But escape seemed impossible, a distant star in a sky filled with clouds. Captain Bart made sure of that. Captain Bart was a man built like a grizzly bear, with a booming voice that could shatter glass and a heart as cold as a winter storm. He ruled Dust Devil Gulch with an iron fist, and his most prized possession was his Gatling gun. It sat on a raised platform in the center of the barracks courtyard, a gleaming metal monster that could spit out hundreds of bullets in a matter of seconds. He called it Betsy, but there was nothing friendly about it. Betsy was his enforcer, his symbol of power. Whenever someone dared to question his authority, he would simply gesture towards the Gatling gun and the argument would end. The mere sight of it was enough to silence even the loudest dissent. Bart loved to show off Betsy's power. Sometimes, just for fun, he would fire a volley into the nearby canyons, the echoes reverberating through the town like thunder. The townsfolk would cower in their homes, knowing that any stray bullet could be their last. He saw their fear and it pleased him. It reminded him who was in charge. He kept Betsy meticulously clean, oiling and polishing every inch of her. He treated it better than he treated his own men. In his eyes, it was more reliable, more loyal. It never questioned his orders, never complained about the heat, and always did exactly what it was told. Betsy was an extension of himself, a tool of oppression that kept Dust Devil Gulch firmly under his control. And everyone knew it. Even Sarah, as she scrubbed the floors of the barracks, could feel the gun's menacing presence, a constant reminder of her captivity. But not everyone in the West was cowed by Captain Bart and his Gatling gun. Far off, beyond the dusty plains and jagged mountains, rode Jake. He was a drifter, a cowboy with a past as mysterious as the desert night. Some said he was an outlaw, others whispered he was a former lawman who had seen too much violence. Whatever the truth, Jake was known for his quick draw, his unwavering sense of justice, and his uncanny ability to appear wherever trouble was brewing. He wasn't looking for trouble. He preferred the solitude of the open range, the company of his trusty horse, and the quiet crackle of a campfire under the stars. But Jake had a code, a deep-seated belief that everyone deserved a fair chance, and he couldn't stand to see injustice go unpunished. He rode a sturdy Mustang named Whisper, a horse as independent and resilient as its rider. Whisper was more than just a means of transportation. He was Jake's partner, his confidant. They had been through thick and thin together, facing down bandits, surviving sandstorms, and navigating treacherous terrain. Jake carried a Colt Peacemaker, its handle worn smooth from years of use. It was an extension of his hand, a tool he could wield with deadly accuracy. He wasn't a gunslinger looking for a fight, but he wouldn't hesitate to defend the innocent. His eyes, the color of the desert sky after a storm, held a quiet intensity, a hint of the fire that burned within him. Jake was a force to be reckoned with, a lone wolf ready to challenge the pack, and Dust Devil Gulch was about to find that out. Key rode into Dust Devil Gulch on a hot afternoon, the sun beating down on his wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't looking for trouble, just a cool drink and a place to rest Whisper. But as he dismounted in front of the saloon, he couldn't help but notice the oppressive atmosphere hanging over the town. The fear in the eyes of the townsfolk, the heavy presence of the militia, it all spoke volumes. He overheard snippets of conversation, hushed whispers about Captain Bart and his cruelty. He saw the way the soldiers treated the townsfolk with arrogance and disdain. Then he saw Sarah. She was carrying a heavy bucket of water from the well to the barracks, her shoulders slumped, her face etched with weariness. He saw the sadness in her eyes, the flicker of defiance that still refused to be extinguished. Something stirred within Jake. He didn't know Sarah, but he recognized the look of someone trapped, someone suffering under an unjust rule. He saw her struggle, her quiet resilience, and it reminded him of things he had fought against in the past. Later, he learned more about Sarah from the saloon keeper, a grizzled old man who had seen better days. He told Jake about her father, about the unfair taxes, about the sacrifices she had made. The more Jake heard, the more his resolve hardened. He couldn't stand by and watch injustice prevail. He knew what he had to do. He had to help Sarah. The decision was made, and a quiet determination settled over him. He finished his drink, his eyes fixed on the distant barracks, and a plan began to form in his mind. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Jake was already preparing. He knew that rescuing Sarah wouldn't be easy. Captain Bart wouldn't let her go without a fight, and that Gatling gun was a formidable obstacle. But Jake was determined. He carefully cleaned and oiled his Colt, checking the chambers to ensure it was ready for action. He sharpened his knife, the blade gleaming in the dim light. He gathered supplies. A canteen filled with water, some dried meat, and a map of the surrounding area. He knew they would need to travel fast and far to escape Captain Bart's reach. He spoke to Whisper, stroking his mane and whispering words of encouragement. "We're going to have a tough day, boy," he said, "but we're going to do what's right." Whisper nudged him gently, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. Jake knew he couldn't just ride into the barracks, guns blazing. He needed a plan, a strategy to minimize the risk to Sarah and himself. He spent the early hours studying the layout of the barracks, observing the guards' routines, and identifying potential escape routes. He decided to wait for nightfall, when the guards would be less alert and the cover of darkness would provide an advantage. He knew it was a gamble, but it was the best chance they had. As the day wore on, Jake tried to rest, but his mind was racing, replaying every possible scenario. He knew that everything depended on him. He was Sarah's only hope, and he wouldn't let her down. As darkness finally fell, blanketing Dust Devil Gulch in shadows, Jake made his move. He led Whisper through the back alleys, avoiding the main streets and the watchful eyes of the militia. He reached the edge of the barracks, where a rickety wooden fence offered the only semblance of cover. He dismounted, tying Whisper to a nearby tree, his hand lingering on the horse's neck for a moment. "Stay quiet, boy," he whispered. "We'll be back soon." He crept towards the fence, his senses on high alert. He could hear the muffled sounds of laughter and conversation coming from the barracks, but he couldn't see anything clearly in the darkness. He found a loose board in the fence and carefully pried it open, creating a small gap just large enough to squeeze through. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He knew that once he crossed that fence, there was no turning back. He slipped through the gap, moving silently like a shadow. He was now inside the barracks compound, surrounded by the enemy. He stuck to the shadows, using the buildings and the uneven terrain to his advantage. He knew he had to find Sarah quickly and get out before anyone noticed they were gone. He made his way towards the main building, where he believed Sarah was being held. He could hear the sound of Captain Bart's booming voice coming from inside, and a shiver ran down his spine. He knew he was getting closer. The rescue had begun. The air crackled with tension, the silence broken only by the distant howl of a coyote. The stage was set for a daring confrontation. Inside the main building, Sarah was scrubbing the floor of Captain Bart's office. He was sitting at his desk, polishing Betsy, the Gatling gun. He glanced at Sarah with a sneer. "You're slow tonight," he growled. "Hurry it up." Sarah kept her head down, ignoring his words. She knew better than to argue with him. Just then the door burst open and Jake stood there, Colt drawn. "Get away from her, Bart," Jake said, his voice calm but firm. Bart's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with anger. "Who do you think you are?" he snarled, reaching for his own gun. "I'm the one who's taking her out of here," Jake replied, stepping forward. Bart lunged for the alarm bell on his desk, but Jake was too fast. He fired a shot, hitting the bell and silencing its shrill ring. Chaos erupted. Soldiers poured into the room, guns blazing. Jake grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her towards the back door. They burst out into the night, bullets whizzing past their heads. Jake knew they couldn't stay here. They had to get to Whisper. He led Sarah through the maze of buildings, dodging gunfire and leaping over obstacles. They reached the fence, and Jake quickly pried open the loose board. They squeezed through the gap and ran towards the tree where Whisper was waiting. But as they reached the open ground, Captain Bart appeared, Betsy gleaming menacingly in the moonlight. He grinned, a cruel glint in his eyes. "Nowhere to run, cowboy," he roared. He raised Betsy, ready to unleash its deadly fury. He knew he had only seconds to react. Betsy was about to unleash a storm of bullets that would tear them both to shreds. He shoved Sarah behind him, shielding her with his body. He drew his Colt, his movements lightning fast. Captain Bart squeezed the trigger and Betsy roared to life. A hail of bullets ripped through the air, tearing up the ground around Jake and Sarah. Jake dove to the side, pulling Sarah with him, narrowly avoiding the deadly spray. He rolled behind a large wooden crate, using it as cover. He peeked out from behind the crate, assessing the situation. Captain Bart was still firing Betsy, sweeping the area with bullets. Soldiers were pouring out of the barracks, adding to the chaos. Jake knew he couldn't stay put. They would be surrounded in minutes. He took a deep breath, focusing his mind. He had to find a way to disable Betsy, to stop the relentless barrage of bullets. He noticed a small oil lamp hanging near the Gatling gun. An idea formed in his mind. He took aim, his hand steady, his eyes focused. He fired a single shot. The bullet struck the oil lamp, shattering it and sending flaming oil splattering across Betsy's mechanism. The Gatling gun sputtered and coughed, then fell silent. Captain Bart roared in frustration, but it was too late. Jake grabbed Sarah's hand and they sprinted towards Whisper. Bullets whizzed past them, but they were getting closer. Jake knew they weren't out of the woods yet, but they had a chance. A glimmer of hope shone through the darkness. They reached Whisper, breathless and adrenaline-fueled. Jake quickly untied the horse, helping Sarah to mount behind him. Whisper, sensing the urgency, pawed at the ground, eager to run. Jake swung himself into the saddle, grabbing the reins. He kicked Whisper into a gallop and they surged forward, leaving the chaos of the barracks behind them. Bullets continued to rain down, but they were moving too fast to be hit. They raced through the streets of Dust Devil Gulch, the sound of gunfire echoing behind them. The townsfolk peeked out from their windows, watching in disbelief as Jake and Sarah thundered past. Some cheered, their hearts filled with hope. Others cowered in fear, knowing that Captain Bart would not take this defiance lightly. They reached the edge of town and burst out onto the open plains. Jake urged Whisper to go faster, pushing the horse to its limits. They needed to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Dust Devil Gulch. Behind them, they could hear the sound of pursuit. Captain Bart and his men were on their trail, determined to recapture Sarah and bring Jake to justice. The chase was on. The open plains stretched before them, a vast and unforgiving landscape. They were running for their lives, their freedom hanging in the balance. The wind whipped through their hair, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the promise of a new beginning. But the journey ahead would be long and perilous. The plains stretched out before them, a sea of golden grass rippling in the wind. But there was no beauty in it for Jake and Sarah, only the stark reality of their desperate flight. Behind them, the relentless pursuit continued. Captain Bart, enraged by Jake's defiance and the damage to his beloved Betsy, had commandeered a wagon and mounted the repaired Gatling gun on its back. He was determined to hunt them down, no matter the cost. The wagon rumbled across the plains, drawn by a team of sturdy mules. Bart sat perched behind the Gatling gun, his eyes narrowed, his finger itching to unleash its fury once more. He fired occasional bursts, the bullets kicking up dust around Jake and Sarah, a constant reminder of the danger they faced. Jake knew they couldn't outrun the Gatling gun forever. They needed to find cover, some way to break the pursuit. He scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of shelter. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the plains into a scorching oven. Whisper was tiring, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Sarah clung to Jake, her face pale with exhaustion and fear. Just when their hope began to fade, Jake spotted a line of jagged rocks in the distance. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He urged Whisper towards the rocks, praying they could reach them before Captain Bart caught up. The Gatling gun continued to fire, the bullets whining past their ears. The race was on, a desperate struggle for survival against the relentless power of Betsy. The plains, once a symbol of freedom, had become a deadly battleground. The jagged rocks loomed closer, offering a promise of shelter. They were a part of a vast canyon system, carved over centuries by wind and water. The landscape was breathtaking, a tapestry of red rock formations, towering mesas, and deep, winding canyons. But its beauty hid a harsh reality. The canyons were treacherous, filled with hidden ravines, sheer cliffs, and venomous creatures. Water was scarce, and the sun beat down with relentless intensity. It was a land that tested the limits of human endurance. As they approached the rocks, Jake noticed a narrow opening, a sliver of darkness that hinted at a possible escape route. He urged Whisper towards the opening, hoping it would lead them to safety. They entered the canyon, leaving the open plains behind them. The temperature dropped immediately, providing a welcome respite from the scorching heat. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. The canyon walls rose high above them, casting long, ominous shadows. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional screech of a hawk or the rustle of leaves. It was a place of mystery and solitude, a world apart from the chaos of Dust Devil Gulch. But their respite was short-lived. Captain Bart and his men were not far behind. They could hear the rumble of the wagon and the echo of their voices, growing closer with each passing moment. The pursuit continued, even in this beautiful but dangerous landscape. Their determination to escape, fueled by a desperate hope for freedom, pushed them onward. They knew that survival depended on their courage and their will to persevere. The canyon twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the wilderness. Jake navigated the treacherous terrain with skill, relying on his instincts and his knowledge of the land. But their path was not without its obstacles. They reached a raging river, swollen by recent rains. The current was strong and the water was deep. It seemed impossible to cross. Jake dismounted, assessing the situation. He knew they couldn't turn back. He found a fallen log long enough to span the river. It was a risky solution, but it was their only option. He carefully guided Whisper onto the log, the horse's hooves slipping and sliding on the wet surface. Sarah held her breath, clinging to Jake for support. They made it across the river, their hearts pounding in their chests. But their troubles weren't over. As they emerged from the canyon, they were confronted by a posse of Captain Bart's men, blocking their path. The posse was led by a grizzled old bounty hunter, known for his ruthlessness and his tracking skills. He had been hired by Captain Bart to bring Jake and Sarah back, dead or alive. "This is the end of the line, Cowboy," the bounty hunter said, his voice cold and menacing. "There's nowhere left to run." Jake knew they were outnumbered, but he wasn't about to surrender. He drew his Colt, ready to face whatever came next. He looked at Sarah, her eyes filled with fear but also with a glimmer of hope. He knew he had to protect her, no matter the cost. The battle for their freedom was far from over. The standoff with the bounty hunter's posse was tense. Jake knew he couldn't win a straight-up gunfight. They were outnumbered and Sarah was vulnerable. He needed to think fast. He glanced at Sarah and he saw something in her eyes that surprised him. It wasn't just fear. There was also determination, a spark of defiance. She wasn't going to give up without a fight. "I have an idea," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Follow my lead." Sarah stepped forward, her chin held high. She addressed the bounty hunter, her voice clear and strong. "We know you're just doing your job," she said. "But Captain Bart is a cruel and unjust man. He's hurting innocent people." She told the bounty hunter about her father, about the unfair taxes, about the fear that gripped Dust Devil Gulch. She spoke with passion and conviction, her words ringing with truth. The bounty hunter listened, his expression unreadable. Jake watched him closely, ready to react if he made a move, but something was happening. He could see doubt creeping into the bounty hunter's eyes. Then Sarah did something unexpected. She offered the bounty hunter a deal. "Let us go," she said, "and I promise I will bake you the best apple pie you've ever tasted." The bounty hunter hesitated, then a slow smile spread across his face. "Apple pie, huh?" he said. "Well, I haven't had a good apple pie in years." He turned to his posse and gave a curt nod. "Let them go," he ordered. "We're done here." Jake and Sarah exchanged a look of surprise and relief. They had done it. They had overcome another obstacle, not with guns, but with courage, compassion, and a promise of apple pie. As they rode away, Jake realized that Sarah was more than just a damsel in distress. She was a strong, resourceful woman, and he was falling for her. They rode for days, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Dust Devil Gulch. Jake used his knowledge of the land to navigate hidden trails and avoid populated areas. They slept under the stars, sharing stories and dreams, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Finally, they stumbled upon a hidden valley, a secluded paradise nestled deep within the mountains. A crystal-clear stream gurgled through the valley floor, feeding a lush meadow filled with wildflowers. Towering pine trees provided shade and shelter. In the center of the valley stood an abandoned cabin, weathered by time but still sturdy. It was a simple structure with a single room and a small fireplace, but it offered everything they needed: safety, shelter, and a chance to rest. They cleaned out the cabin, sweeping away the dust and cobwebs. They gathered firewood and stocked up on supplies. They fished in the stream and foraged for berries in the meadow. They created a home, a sanctuary where they could escape the dangers of the outside world. For the first time since leaving Dust Devil Gulch, they felt safe. They laughed, they sang, they danced under the moonlight. They were free, at least for a little while. They knew that Captain Bart would eventually find them, but for now, they could savor the peace and tranquility of their hidden valley. It was a place where they could heal, where they could dream, and where their love could blossom. The valley was their haven, their refuge from the storm. In the quiet evenings, after the chores were done and the sun had set behind the mountains, Jake and Sarah would sit by the fireplace, sharing their stories and their dreams. It was in these moments that their bond deepened, their hearts drawing closer with each passing word. Sarah told Jake about her life before Dust Devil Gulch, about her childhood on a small farm, about her love for baking, and about her dreams of opening her own bakery. She spoke of the joy she found in creating delicious treats, of the satisfaction she felt when she saw the smiles on people's faces. Jake, in turn, told Sarah about his past, about his days as a lawman, about the violence he had witnessed, and about the reasons he had chosen to become a drifter. He spoke of his desire for peace and justice, and of his hope that one day he could find a place where he could settle down and start a new life. They shared their fears and their hopes, their regrets and their aspirations. They laughed together, they cried together, they supported each other through their pain. They learned about each other's strengths and weaknesses, their passions and their dreams. With each passing day, their love grew stronger. They were no longer just strangers, thrown together by circumstance. They were partners, friends, and soulmates. They had found in each other a love that was as fierce as their rebellion, a love that could conquer any obstacle. They knew that their time in the hidden valley was limited, but they cherished every moment, knowing that their love would endure no matter what the future held. They built a lasting connection, a testament to the power of shared experiences and open hearts. Their idyllic existence was shattered one morning by the distant sound of gunfire. Jake knew instantly that Captain Bart had found them. Their sanctuary had been breached. He grabbed his Colt and ran outside, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw Captain Bart and his men riding towards the valley, their faces grim, their guns drawn. Betsy, mounted once again on the wagon, loomed large and menacing. "It's time to go, Sarah," Jake said, his voice urgent. "They're here." Sarah emerged from the cabin, her face pale but determined. She grabbed her father's old rifle, a relic from a time when he had defended his farm against bandits. She might not be a gunslinger, but she was ready to fight for her freedom. They knew they couldn't outrun Captain Bart. He had too many men, and Betsy gave him an overwhelming advantage. They had to make a stand to defend their valley, their home, and their love. Jake quickly devised a plan. He would use the terrain to his advantage, setting traps and ambushes to slow down Captain Bart's advance. Sarah would provide cover fire, using her rifle to pick off the militia men. They worked together, setting their plan into motion. They knew the odds were stacked against them, but they were determined to fight to the end. They were fighting for their freedom, for their love, and for the chance to build a better life. The final showdown was about to begin. The air crackled with tension, the silence broken only by the distant rumble of the wagon and the determined pounding of their hearts. Key's plan was intricate, relying on his intimate knowledge of the valley and his sharp instincts. He had set up tripwires connected to noisemakers, alerting them to the militia's movements. He had also created false trails, leading the enemy into dead ends and treacherous terrain. As Captain Bart and his men advanced into the valley, they triggered the tripwires, setting off a cacophony of clanging pots and pans. The militia men were startled, their horses skittish. Sarah, positioned on a high ridge overlooking the valley, began to fire her rifle, picking off the militia men one by one. Her shots were accurate and deadly, forcing the enemy to take cover. Jake used the chaos to his advantage, moving swiftly through the trees, ambushing the militia men from unexpected angles. He used his Colt with deadly precision, taking down the enemy with single shots. Captain Bart, enraged by the resistance, ordered his men to focus their fire on the cabin. Betsy roared to life, unleashing a hail of bullets that tore through the trees and ripped apart the cabin walls. Jake knew he had to disable Betsy again. He couldn't allow Captain Bart to destroy their home. He raced towards the wagon, dodging bullets and leaping over obstacles. He reached the wagon and jumped onto the back, surprising Captain Bart. A fierce hand-to-hand fight ensued. Jake and Captain Bart grappled for control of Betsy, their faces contorted with rage. The fate of the valley and their love hung in the balance. It was a battle of wits and skill. Key fought with the fury of a cornered lion. He dodged Captain Bart's wild swings, his movements fluid and precise. He knew he had to end this fight quickly. He saw an opening and seized it, delivering a powerful blow to Captain Bart's jaw. Bart staggered backward, his eyes glazed over. Jake didn't hesitate. He followed up with another blow, sending Bart crashing to the ground. Bart lay motionless, defeated. The remaining militia men, seeing their leader fall, lost their will to fight. They scattered, fleeing into the trees, their tails between their legs. The battle was over. Jake had won. He stood there, panting and bruised but victorious. He had protected Sarah, defended their home, and vanquished the evil that had threatened to destroy them. Sarah ran to Jake, throwing her arms around him. "You did it," she cried, her voice filled with relief and gratitude. "You saved us." Jake held her close, his heart swelling with love. He had never felt so alive, so fulfilled. He had found his purpose, his reason for being. He was no longer just a drifter, wandering aimlessly through the West. He was a hero, a protector, and a lover. He was ready to build a new life with Sarah in their hidden valley, far away from the darkness of Dust Devil Gulch. He had won, and so had she. The valley was safe. With Captain Bart gone, the remaining militia men posed no further threat. They had lost their leader, their will, and their purpose. Dust Devil Gulch was finally free from their tyranny. Jake and Sarah spent the next few weeks repairing the cabin, rebuilding their home. They planted a garden, filling the valley with the scent of flowers and fresh vegetables. They fished in the stream, their laughter echoing through the mountains. Sarah began to bake again, filling the cabin with the sweet aroma of cinnamon rolls and apple pies. She shared her creations with Jake, and he savored every bite, his heart filled with happiness. They were finally safe, finally free, finally together. They had overcome every obstacle, faced every challenge, and emerged stronger and more in love than ever before. They knew that their life in the hidden valley wouldn't be easy. There would be hardships, challenges, and uncertainties, but they were ready to face them together, hand in hand, their love guiding them through the darkness. They looked towards the future with hope and optimism. They dreamed of building a family, of creating a community, of sharing their love and their happiness with the world. They knew that their journey had just begun, but they were ready for whatever came next. They were ready to live their legend together. The sun shone brightly on their valley, a symbol of the brighter future that lay ahead. They had found their paradise. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and gold, Jake and Sarah stood on a hill overlooking their valley. They watched as the shadows lengthened and the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky. Jake turned to Sarah, his eyes filled with love and admiration. He took her hand in his touch gentle but firm. "I love you, Sarah," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "I can't imagine my life without you." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with happiness. "I love you too, Jake," she replied. "You saved me and you gave me a new life." They mounted Whisper, their trusty steed who had carried them through so much danger. Jake took the reins and they began to ride towards the setting sun, their silhouettes outlined against the fiery sky. They rode in silence, their hearts filled with peace and contentment. They knew that their journey had just begun, but they were ready to face whatever came next together. As they rode into the sunset, they became symbols of hope and freedom, their story echoing through the mountains, inspiring others to fight for what they believed in, to never give up on their dreams, and to always believe in the power of love. They were Jake and Sarah, the cowboy and the baker, the renegade and the rescued, and their love was as fierce as their rebellion. They rode off into legend, their story forever etched in the heart of the West. Their future was bright, their love was true. They were finally home,